since last night and since this morning and this afternoon. We have looked at the 7 signs that Jesus performed. I'm going to refresh our memory by looking at the purpose statement of the Gospel of John that is found in John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31. Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So here we see John asserting the fact that Jesus did many signs, but 7 were carefully selected so that through this 7 signs, it points beyond the miracle itself. It points to the one that's doing this sign. It points us to Jesus so that we may believe Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing we may have life in his name. That was the purpose of the Gospel of John, is to persuade us that Jesus is the Christ, that we may believe in him. So if we can recap, we have looked at these 7 signs that Jesus did, turning the water into wine, healing the official son, healing the invalid man for 38 years at the pool of Bethesda, feeding the 5,000, walking on water, which is a private theophany for the disciples, healing the man that was born blind, and finally raising of Lazarus from his death. Now, when we look at all these 7 signs, we can see that each of these signs often divides people, right? Either you believe or you do not believe. Either you accept or you reject. Either the disciples they believe in Jesus, or the Pharisees decided to persecute Jesus. There's always a division, right? And when you look at each of these 7 signs, we are reminded that the first sign when Jesus performed in Cana in Galilee, the first of his sign is a small little kampong, not in Jerusalem, and yet he turned the water into wine. Remind us that Jesus has power over quality. The wine is the best wine, and yet the timing of Jesus, his timing, his hour is always perfect. It was never a minute too early or never a minute too late. It is always perfect timing. The result, the disciples believe in him. Right? Jesus appears in a Jewish family in the midst of the celebration. Jesus celebrates life with us. In the healing of the official son, we see a Gentile has now become part of the people of God. And this Gentile came to Jesus, begging Jesus to come with him into his home in Capernaum so that he may heal the son that is sick. But Jesus said, "Go, your son will live." And he just took Jesus as he word, and he went back to his hometown. Halfway through, he met his servant, and the servant told him that the son lives, the fever has gone. And that was a precise moment that Jesus said, "Go, your son will live." And this sign tells us that the one who performs it has power over geographical space. He's not limited by space. He transcends space. He is God, And what is also important is that this sign points to the fact that Gentile has now become the people of God, because the royal official, after seeing what Jesus has done, seeing the sign that the Son lives, he and his entire household believe in Jesus. When it comes to the third sign, healing of the invalid man for 38 years at the pool in Bethesda in Jerusalem, we see that Jesus has power over time. The fact that this man has been invalid for 38 years is not a concern for Jesus. Jesus transcends over time. He can redeem the time. But yet at the same time, we also see that this sign happens in the pool of Bethesda, where next to it, there is a temple of Asclepius and pagan medicinal bath there. Which God is this? Who is this Asclepius, the God of healing, where someone right at his doorstep, right outside his temple, and yet shown no compassion to this man? Jesus came and asked this invalid man, "Do you want to get well?" in the language of Asclepius, challenging Asclepius as the most powerful God at that point in time, thereby showing Jesus is far, far, far more powerful than Asclepius, because he can heal someone that has been invalid for 38 years when he discovered that this man was still lying at the pool of Bethesda. And this story also tells us Jesus made the initiative, made the first initial contact with this man that was invalid for 38 years. He sought out this man Yet this man was lying at the temple of Asclepius. Asclepius did nothing. And Asclepius has a reputation of being a benevolent God, a compassionate God, but yet a God that does not show compassion to someone at outside his temple for 38 years. Here Jesus shows us that he is a gracious, he is a compassionate God. That in feeding the 5,000, Jesus exposes the hearts of the people. Do you truly want to believe that Jesus is the Christ? Many, after being fed by Jesus, departed from him because they say that this is a hard teaching, who can accept it, and they left. And I suggested to you earlier that this is probably due to the fact that for 5,000 people, they can't even find anyone willing to give up their little lunch box to the to the crowd, right? Only this boy gave up his 5 loaves and 2 fish. And because of that, Jesus can multiply. He has power over quantity. We are limited by material, by what we hold, but Jesus can multiply that. Jesus transcends that. Again, it shows us that he is God. He meets the needs of the people. And then after dismissing the crowd, Jesus walks on water, a private theophany for the disciples, where he revealed himself as God to the disciples. He is the I am that I am. He wanted to pass by them. And Jesus does reveal his glory to them. He is the I am. He is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. The people wanted to make him become the political king, but that's not the purpose that Jesus came to this earth. He is the Lord of lords. He is the King of kings. He is the I am. It's after this theophany for the disciples, I am. Do not be afraid, that Jesus pronounces his series of 7 I am, saying, I am the bread of life, I am the light of the world, I am the resurrection and life, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And after revealing himself to the disciples, a private theophany, he heals the man that is born blind. And this has caused a lot of religious controversies. And this blind man landed himself as a religious object of investigation. But Jesus can reverse misfortune in the sense that people will think that who sinned? This man or his parents sinned, but Jesus can reverse all this. Jesus said, no, it's not because the parents of this man sinned. This was done so that the works of God might be displayed. Even people think that he may be a sinner, but God says he is not. God's work can still be revealed through him. How so? This is the one that Jesus revealed himself to him. If you look at the rest of the earlier signs, right, apart from the disciples where Jesus revealed himself as God to them, the rest you don't see Jesus revealing himself to the individual, right? But to this man that is born blind, after he can see, Jesus revealed himself. Do you believe in the Son of Man? Who is he, sir? You have seen him. The one that is talking to you. He is standing right in front of you. And this man can only respond by saying, my God, Lord, I believe, and worship Jesus. And finally, Jesus raised Lazarus, a very dear friend. And we have seen that how he deliberately delayed coming to the hometown of Lazarus. And then when he came, he wept. He wept deeply. There's such a pain within Jesus, partly because a loved one has passed away, and partly also Jesus knew the condition of humanity at that point in time, and that's why he was here to redeem humanity. And the raising of Lazarus shows that Jesus has power over death. Death could not hold Lazarus back. And this sign points towards Jesus' own resurrection as well. So when you look at all these 7 signs, power over quality, over distance and space, over time, over quantity, over nature, over misfortune, and over death, it points us towards Jesus as the one who is doing it. Yes, in light of the Greco-Roman mythology, there's also other gods that has power over quality. There's also other gods that has power over nature, right? But which God has power over all these 7 areas? Only one, Jesus. And that's what John is trying to tell us. This God, Jesus Christ, who has walked on earth, has demonstrated his power over all these areas, and thereby it can only point to one thing, that Jesus is indeed God. He is indeed the Messiah. He is indeed the Son of God. Now, if I have shown you true that He is God, He is the Messiah, He is the Son of God, will you not believe in this God so that you may have life in His name? That's what the Gospel of John is trying to say. As for us who are believers today, perhaps all this sign may once again affirm us in our faith that this is a true God that we believe in. Not only that, perhaps we can also ask ourselves as we look at this 7 sign, which is the sign that we identify with the most in this moment of our journey of faith. Perhaps for some of us, it is the sign that reminds us that Jesus is all-powerful. He can redeem time. Perhaps it is a sign that Jesus has power over misfortune. Perhaps it's a sign that Jesus has a power over death, that we did not fear death. Where we are in our spiritual journey. And I pray that each of these signs will speak powerfully to us in whatever circumstances we have been. Each of us have a very unique spiritual journey. Your journey is different from mine, and mine is different from another brother or another sister. But I believe in the power of God, that God can use His word to speak to each one of us powerfully and personally. And I pray as you reflect on these 7 signs, that God will also speak to you in a very, very personal way, that you may encounter God. God may speak powerfully to your present situation, in your stations of life, in your journey of life, that you can be assured, you can be comforted, you can be affirmed that He's truly a God that loves all of us. Now, for the next 5 or 10 minutes, what I want you to do is to turn to page 2021. Is to review all the 7 signs that we have gone through. Now, I've shared some of this, and I fill in one of the blanks for you. What I want us to do for the next maybe 10 minutes or so is to take this space as a personal space between you and God. Fill in the blanks in the sense that what has God spoken to you about this sign? Just feel free. This is your own notebook. Feel free to write down what strikes you in the sign of turning the water into wine. What strikes you in the healing of the official son? What strikes you about healing of the invalid man at the pool? What strikes you in feeding the 5,000? What strikes you in Jesus walking on water? What strikes you in the healing of the man born blind? What strikes you in the raising of Lazarus? So take this time and fill in this little chart. Maybe just focus on the outcome and what has God spoken to you through this sign? What strikes you? What is something that's personal to you, that speaks powerfully to you at this point in your own journey of faith? Maybe for us, not all the 7 signs will speak to us, but for some of us, maybe one speaks to us louder than the other. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. So this is a time that you have for you to fill in this chart and for you to reflect where we have come from, so that you have opportunity also to respond to God. Right, so I'll just give you the space for you to reflect, pray, and for you probably to jot down how has God has spoken to you, and so that you may also respond to God. And after this, I'll take some questions. If there's any question, we'll probably have another 20-30 minutes or so of Q&A. If you have any questions after this. So let's work on this first for about 10 minutes, and then I'll wrap up with any Q&A. What the scripture says about Jesus Himself, and you also discover afresh that God's word speaks to you in a very personal way as well. And I hope that through last night and today thus far, in some ways you have a little encounter with the living Christ. And for the rest of the time before we leave for this evening, as I said yesterday, I'll open up this time for any questions that you may have, any questions that I have not that you have that I have not addressed. This is the moment for you. Feel free to raise any questions that you might have. Right? So the time is yours now. Please feel free. Yes, at the Can you take the...
Sorry, another question. Why was it easier for the Pharisees and the people around to believe the law of Moses, which was way before, and they're not seeing what Moses have done, but yet believe and follow the law, but yet hardened to believe the miracles, or the signs in front of them, and they were there when Jesus was born, they know the story, everything about Virgin Mary and all the stuff, but why was it difficult to believe the God coming? Yeah.
Thank you. Great question. Why will the people find that it's so easy to believe in the law of Moses rather than to believe in Jesus was right before their eyes and they witnessed him doing all these miraculous signs? I think part of it is also due to our human nature. I think we do better with black and white. And then suddenly Jesus come and turn everything upside down. We feel a little bit uncomfortable. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I think we probably need to go back to a little bit history to the intertestamental period. Now, what happened during the intertestamental period is that during this period, this is where the Pharisee movement came about, the Pharisees. If you go back to the Old Testament, you don't read Pharisees. Pharisee, when you come to the New Testament, you find that they are there. So where did they come from? It's actually during this 400 years, this period, that the movement of Pharisees began to develop. Now, remember earlier on I mentioned about what happened in 167 BCE, where Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple, and that led to the Maccabean revolt. Now, and then they wrestle back the temple, and then they celebrate the feast of dedication, the festival of lights, commemorate the rededication of the temple. Now, what was also interesting during this period of time is that the Pharisee as a movement came about at that time. And their noble intention was this: look, God has sent us to exile in the Old Testament. And today, we are still living in the exile as we anticipate the coming of the Messiah. Look, the reason why God punished us for so many years, in the exile, is simply because we have forgotten God's law. We have failed to keep God's commandment. So the Pharisees, their name themselves means they are separated ones, right? So they themselves said, maybe when we go back to the law of Moses, God may look upon us with favor and send us his Messiah to liberate us from the power of Rome or whatever rulers that's ruling us. Now, when the Pharisee came about, they not only followed the law of Moses, they created another tradition called the tradition of the elders. Mark chapter 7 makes reference to this. When the people go up to the marketplace, they will wash their hand, not only wash their hand, wash everything that they touch, their cup, their pitchers, their bed as well. And they hold on to the tradition of the elders. Now, how did this tradition of the elders come about? This is where the Pharisees try to make things easy for people. Now, how do they make easy? Now, we all know that the law of Moses says we must keep the Sabbath holy, right? So the Sabbath is meant for us to keep as holy so that we remember God and we worship God. And a lot of people would have asked the Pharisees, so how do we keep the Sabbath holy? We are supposed to cease from work, right? What is the definition of work? How much work should we do? So the Pharisee came out with different rules and regulations to help the people keep the Sabbath holy. And so according to the tradition of the elders, the Pharisee would say something like, number one, on Sabbath day, you cannot walk more than 2,000 steps. If you walk more than 2,000 steps, that is considered work. So you can imagine on Sabbath, you start counting how many steps you walk instead of worshiping God. That's why when Jesus was on earth, Jesus said, you fellas have to find a way of putting aside the law of God and introduce all these things that people cannot keep. So the Pharisee have all these rules. For example, what about divorce? The Pharisee will say, well, you want to get divorced? If your wife burns your cooking, this is really a case, The Pharisee, the rabbi will say, if the wife burns your cooking for the husband, that is sufficient ground to divorce your wife. As simple as that. No, the Pharisees then begin to introduce all this. So they introduce one whole body of tradition called the tradition of the elders, and they built the tradition of elders around the law of Moses. So really, when Jesus was on earth, it's not only the law of Moses, but all this tradition of the elders that they were keeping. And that's why they're so obsessed with Jesus breaking the Sabbath, because to them, Sabbath, you're supposed to cease from work. And they actually define, there's a case that they say that what happens if there is earthquake that happens on the Sabbath? If there's earthquake on the Sabbath, what must you do? You must still keep the Sabbath holy, right? So when there's earthquake, a building has fallen, someone is trapped in the building, the first thing you got to do is ask the person, hello, Noel, are you still alive? If you don't hear from him, we presume that he's dead and you cannot do anything. You have to wait until the following day, then you remove the rubble and bring the body out. But if you hear Noel say, yes, wow, it's very painful, please help. Now you know there's urgency to help. What you do is, it's okay, it's permissible for you to remove the rubble and go and help this person. You will not break the Sabbath law. No? So they created all these rules and regulations. So really, for the human nature is when there's black and white, it's always easier to follow. And then come here, Jesus come and tell you, you must love your neighbor of yourself. What do you mean, my neighbor is myself? Who is my neighbor? You know, a neighbor means you have to be able to help everyone that is in need. Jesus said it in the parable of the Good Samaritan. And then when Jesus said in Sermon of the Mount, when someone slap you here, give your other cheek to them. Oh, that's too difficult for us to follow. I think an eye for an eye is easier for us to follow. So that is why I think the Pharisees were so obsessed with all this rule, because to them, they think what started as noble become an obsession. What started as something they say, let's keep the law so that God may look upon us with favor, has overridden everything else. That's why if you read all the scriptures passages that we have read today, they're also obsessed. Who did this? Why? Who's the person? They still want to go. They have forgotten to get Jesus. They've forgotten that a man that is born blind is healed. A man that's been invalid for 38 years is healed. They don't even celebrate life anymore. They are so obsessed with breaking God's law. And that is why, to them, if you break God's law, God may punish us, and so they are obsessed with all those things. So that's how the Pharisees operate during the first century. Right? Okay, and yes. Okay, can you take the mic so that everyone can hear your question? Yes, thank you.
My question is with regards to the first miracle.
Yes.
And the mother of Jesus asked him to do something. Jesus replied that, what has it got to do with me? Which is rightly so, because he is just a guest. Jesus was a guest for the wedding. But nevertheless, he eventually did it. Is it out of obedience that he did what the mother asked him to do?
Okay, is it
yes.
out of obedience that Jesus did?
Yes.
Okay, now if you look at the sign carefully, as what I said last night, I probably think that when Mary, the mother of Jesus, told him about the situation, Jesus said, woman, what has it got to do, with me? And then Jesus said, my hour has not yet come. And then subsequently he did the sign. Now, he turned the water into wine. Why did he do so? Whether he's a guest or not, I'm not so sure, but the fact that he's a guest, probably they might be related or they're close friends. Right? They might be, I don't know. Right? But I probably think that when Jesus did this sign, it is because the time has come for him to do so, because he said, my hour has not yet come. That's why last night I emphasized on the fact that my hour has not yet come is the significant point in this narrative. Not so much of what is the meaning of dear woman, whether Jesus being rude. I say that let's not focus on that, but focus on the fact that my hour has not yet come. So I think I ask you to do, if you have the time, look at John, because in the Gospel of John, the concept of the time and hour is very significant. My hour, my Father's hour, the time has come. Jesus often emphasized that, and that is a theme throughout in the Gospel of John, that Jesus will only act when the time is right. So I also think that in this sign, the time has come. That's why he did what he did. That's how I would see it. Okay, I really do not know. As I say, I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. Is Jesus being rude? Is Jesus saying that we are just guests, don't do anything? I really do not know. Okay, any other questions? Like in all auction, I'm a former property valuer, we also do auctions, right? We always say, going once, going twice. When I say going 3 times means, okay, before 3 times, there's a hand already. Your final bid. No. Yes.
This is regarding this healing at the pool. And then Jesus went through a long narrative, and then at verse 5, wait, I lost it. 5:22, John 5:22. The Father judges no one, but has entrusted all judgment to the Son. I know it's not related to what we are studying, but it just intrigued me when I read it, because does it mean that when our time comes, we face Jesus but not the Father?
Okay, whether we face Jesus or not the Father. Interestingly, as far as Paul is concerned, if you read at 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, Paul mentioned that, okay, let me read 2 Corinthians 5:10. Right. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5:10, for we all must appear before the bema, the judgment seat of Christ, so that each of us may receive what is due us for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. This seems to suggest that all of us need to appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Right? That's what it seems to suggest here. Yes, we will all have to face Christ one day and to receive, according to Paul here, for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. Right? Okay, so I'll probably think, based on what Christ says, it's a judgment seat of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:10. Okay, going once? I don't need to go up to 3. Yes.
Normally we characterize God as omnipotent, omniscient, and present. So therefore we say that God and Jesus divine is outside the time. So when Jesus was among men, he was within time. Is that correct to say? So
yes.
Therefore he is governed by the linearity of time.
Yes. Okay, any more? One? Going one? No, as auctioneer, always bang, that's it. Okay, any more question? Any last question that you might have? If none, then we'll probably end a little bit earlier. I know that some of you will have to go for CCM dinner. I'm not going to hold you any longer. For some of you who may have to go for that. Any other last question? If not, I really want to thank all of you, for your sitting through the whole day. That's a very long day, and thank you for your attention. It's always an encouragement for us, for myself personally, when I see people are still listening to me at this hour, and you're still awake, you have not fallen asleep there. So with that, I'm going to thank you very much. I hope that in some ways God will have spoken to you in a very personal way. Thank you so much, and I'll pass the time back to Agree. Okay.